Hey friends, I want to welcome you to a special edition of Scott Fox After 9. This is a rare weekend edition. I'm coming to you today from my home studio, and I'm doing a weekend edition because something happened late last week that proved we are in an intense moment in the history of humanity. The world is changing. Mark Carney announced the New World Order. Or did he announce it? Or did he acknowledge that it's actually happening? I think it's more something to do with that. In this episode, I'm going to play for you what Mark Carney said on his trip over to China. I'm going to play a little bit of what he said on his trip to Qatar, and I'm going to talk about the New World Order. But here's the thing. I have really struggled with this because there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, and I am going to acknowledge the ones that I think have a little bit of credibility. I am going to tell you what I think is really going on, but I want to stress before I get too far into this episode, I'm not an expert. And nobody really knows unless they are in global power. Nobody really knows. And I'm going to say the Prime Minister has done a very poor job at explaining to Canadians what the New World Order is. So stick around on this episode. We're going to go through what the Prime Minister said and talk about what it means. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the conspiracy theories and whether or not they have any credibility in this. I want you to know, while I do give some time and credibility to some of the quote-unquote conspiracy theories that are out there, I look at things through a critical lens. I ask why, and I do a lot of research. But again, I don't necessarily know. One of the things I'm not going to do is be a mouthpiece for conspiracy theories on this episode of the pod. I'm just going to do what I do every single day. I'm going to call them the way I see them. I also want to point out that all this week, brand new episodes of Scott Fox After 9 are coming out, and there's a lot to talk about that doesn't have to do with this New World Order. What happened in the Buffalo Bills game yesterday? I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow. The fact that the courts have now confirmed that what the Canadian government did to the Freedom Convoy protesters was a violation of our charter rights. That needs to be discussed, and I'm going to discuss it this week. This episode, though, is dedicated to the New World Order. Let's hear exactly what Prime Minister Mark Carney said that got the entire world talking instantly. Here's the Prime Minister.
As you mentioned, mine is the first visit of a Canadian Prime Minister to China in nearly a decade. The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the New World Order.
That was a weird way to say it. I don't know why he got all dramatic when he did, but it certainly caught a lot of people's attention. But I think that that's the clip that most people have seen, 30 seconds long. He had a few more remarks after that, and I think for context, it's important to hear what else the Prime Minister said.
It's a partnership with new focus and greater depth and a sense of purpose. And I look forward to realizing its promise and building on it in the years to come. Partnership that leverages our strengths to create greater stability, security, sustainability, and prosperity for all our peoples. And I look forward to this working session to advance those objectives. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the Prime Minister has said it's a new world order. Was he announcing a new world order, or was he acknowledging that a new world order is unfolding right before our very eyes? Well, that's an interesting question because since the Cold War, the U.S. has basically been the global superpower. They've been the world's police. Most of our trading gets reconciled in U.S. dollars. It has been America's world since the end of the Cold War. We're talking 30, 40 years. But as you know, Donald Trump has since been elected, and that has sort of upended the current or former, I guess it would be the former world order, and things are going in a different direction. In my estimation, what the Prime Minister was saying there is an acknowledgement that, yes, there is a new world order and the global trading, the global trade, the global security, global priorities, they're all shifting right now. I want to go to more of what the Prime Minister said. That was him in formal meetings. That was a little bit of what the media was allowed to hear when he was having talks with the Premier. Now, let's play a little bit of the news conference that happened afterwards. This is a little weird because it was just the Prime Minister talking. He wasn't out with Chinese officials. He was speaking to Canadian media. This is Prime Minister Mark Carney.
It has been a historic and productive 2 days, during which myself and fellow ministers have had the opportunity to meet with President Xi, Premier Li, Chairman Zhao, as well as business leaders across a number of key sectors. And I am very pleased to announce that we have made significant progress in a number of key areas. Stepping back, it's been 8 years since a Canadian Prime Minister visited China. And in that time, the world has changed dramatically. The technological revolution and the energy transition are accelerating at an unprecedented pace. The global trading system is undergoing a fundamental change, and the effectiveness of multilateral institutions on which trading powers such as Canada and China have greatly relied, that effectiveness has been greatly reduced. This is happening fast, it's large, it's a rupture, it's not a transition. What we do now as Canada, how we position ourselves in the world, will shape our future for decades to come. Canada can thrive in a new system, but to do so, we must be ambitious. We must work at speed and scale to find new partners, to diversify our trade and attract unprecedented levels of investment in our country. And we must be pragmatic. That means we have to understand the differences between Canada and other countries, and then focus our efforts to work together where we're aligned. And it's with this approach that Canada is forging a new strategic partnership with China. China is the world's second largest economy. It contributes 1/3 to global growth. It's our second largest trading partner and our third largest investor. Two-way trade between our countries amounts to nearly $120 billion a year. There are 400,000 careers across Canada. Farmers in the prairies, manufacturers and engineers in Ontario and Quebec, fish harvesters in Atlantic Canada and British Columbia, they are all supported by trade with China. $20 billion in wages are earned each year by Canadians because of our existing trade relationship. And this is a relationship that has been distant and uncertain for nearly a decade. That has held back investment, it's stalled business growth, and cost Canadian workers good opportunity.
I'm going to pause the Prime Minister there, and if you're new to Scott Fox After 9, welcome. Every single day, I give you a lot more context, a lot more clarity, and I give you longer clips of what our leaders actually said. When you watch the news, you don't really get the full story, and if you Google CBC and Prime Minister Carney and his speech, it's very obvious that the media is trying to snowplow this for him, because in some cases, they even cut out the part on the news where he said New World Order. Now, what Prime Minister Carney is trying to suggest there is that there are hundreds of thousands of Canadian careers and salaries and jobs that are contingent on our trade with China. That's simply not quite accurate. That's not accurate. The entire livelihood of fishermen doesn't completely rely on China. Now, sure, we do a lot of business with China. Absolutely. Could we do more? Yes, absolutely we could. But there's other partners around the world that our seafood harvesters and our farmers and our industry are supporting. It's not just China. So the Prime Minister was being a little bit misleading there in trying to sell this deal to Canadians. Here's a bit more of what the Prime Minister had to say in his remarks, then I'll get to the Q&A.
And to that end, President Xi and I are announcing that Canada and China are forging a new strategic partnership. It will focus on 5 key areas where both our nations stand to make substantial and sustained gains. The first is in clean energy and climate competitiveness, areas where Canada and China have immense strengths and complementary strengths. Second, we're expanding trade, particularly in agriculture and food, where Canada is a reliable partner. Third, our commitment to multilateralism and strengthening global governance comes at a time when all of this is in flux. Fourth, we're deepening engagement in public safety and security to protect our peoples. And finally, people-to-people ties and culture are being enhanced to enrich our lives. To begin, we're leveraging our strengths in energy, clean tech, and climate competitiveness. Canada is an energy superpower in both conventional and clean energies. We have an over 80% clean electricity grid with vast potential to power the clean economy of the future. China's strengths in electric vehicle sector are undeniable. China produces some of the most affordable and efficient energy efficient vehicles in the world. And in order for Canada to build our own competitive EV sector, we need to learn from innovative partners, access their supply chains, and increase local demand. And to help deliver the full potential of these partnerships and bring down costs for Canadians, Canada has agreed to allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market, with the most favored nation tariff rate of 6.1%. This is a return to the levels that existed prior to recent trade frictions. But it's a return under an agreement that promises much more for Canadians. It's expected that within 3 years, this agreement will drive considerable Chinese investment in Canada's auto sector, creating good careers in Canada and accelerating our progress towards a net zero future and the auto industry of the future.
Okay, so the Prime Minister is banking here on Chinese EVs being very appealing to Canadians, whereas these things were persona non grata for a long time. You've heard Ontario Premier Doug Ford, you've heard the union, you've heard all kinds of people say, we've got to keep those Chinese EVs out of our market or it'll completely undermine our auto industry. Prime Minister Carney is saying this is now a cost-cutting measure for Canadians, and bringing them in will help us create our EV industry. Is that realistic? Or are we just handing our auto industry over to China? Time will tell. Here's more of the Prime Minister.
With this agreement, it's also anticipated that within 5 years, more than 50% of these vehicles will be affordable EVs with an import price of less than $35,000. Over the next 15 years, Canada intends to double our energy grid through major investments in hydro, nuclear, solar, and wind power. That creates tremendous opportunities for Chinese partnerships in these investments, including in energy storage and offshore wind. On the other hand, Canada is developing our oil and natural gas reserves, one of the world's largest, to be the lowest risk, lowest cost, and lowest carbon. Last June, we exported our first LNG shipment to Asia, and we're scaling up quickly, making major investments in streamlining approvals. By 2030, Canada will produce 50 million tons of LNG each year, all of which will be destined for Asian markets.
Okay, you're hearing the Prime Minister lay out what is not just a simple deal to get canola tariffs lifted on Canadian farmers, and in exchange, we're allowing the Chinese to sell some EVs in Canada. That's kind of the way they floated this in the top line headline information that they gave to Canadians. But as you've just heard the Prime Minister explain, it's actually much, much more than that. This is a deep integration between Canada and China. This is a deal here that's been done that is going to allow Canadian police or require Canadian police to share intelligence information with Chinese police. That's another major red flag for a lot of Canadians. Listen, I'm going to get to some more analysis on this, but I think it's important, particularly at this moment in our history, that Canadians hear more of what Prime Minister Carney had to say. Let's let him wrap it up, and then we're going to talk more about the new world order.
And so I'm pleased today to announce that Canada and China have reached a preliminary but landmark trade agreement to remove trade barriers and reduce tariffs. By March the 1st, Canada expects that China will lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed to a combined rate of approximately 15%. China is a 4 billion canola seed market for Canadian producers, and this change represents a significant drop from the current combined tariff levels of 84%. Furthermore, Canada expects that Canadian canola meal, as well as Canadian lobsters, crabs, and peas, will not be subject to relevant anti-discrimination tariffs from March 1st of this year until at least the end of this year. Together, these results will unlock nearly $3 billion of export orders for Canadian farmers, fish harvesters, and processors as they realize the full potential of this market of 1.4 billion people. With this agreement, we also expect to see a resolution of many long-term obstacles for a range of important agricultural sectors from beef to pet food. We welcome Chinese business plans to significantly scale up their investment in Canada, in major clean energy projects, as well as in agriculture and consumer projects. And by building this new strategic partnership, we're creating the stability and certainty needed to catalyze new investment and opportunities for Canadian workers. Both Canada and China are strong advocates of multilateralism. China will be the host of APEC this year, and Canada stands ready to support their agenda, focused on strengthening and reinvigorating the multilateral system. Canada appreciates China's support for our bid to host the APEC Leaders Summit in 2029. The fourth pillar of our new strategic partnership is public safety and security. And this is an area where pragmatic and constructive engagement with China is crucial. Through this pillar, our law enforcement agencies will increase cooperation to better combat narcotics trafficking, transnational crime, cybercrime, synthetic drugs, and money laundering. And we will create safer communities for people in both our countries. And finally, people have always been at the core of this relationship. As I said, Canada is home to a Chinese diaspora of 2 million. Over 300,000 Chinese visitors came to Canada in 2024. China is Canada's 7th largest source of tourism. So the fifth pillar of this partnership will build on opportunities for cultural exchanges and partnerships that further deepen our people-to-people ties. That means museums, digital content creators, visual artists, and other creative professionals in our respective countries will have new opportunities to collaborate. It also means more tourism, including following China's decision in November to grant approved destination status for group travelers to Canada. And we're building on this progress, looking to increase travel, exchange, and deepen our cultural ties. I'm very pleased to share that President Xi, in our meeting today, has committed to ensuring visa-free access for Canadians traveling to China.
And that's what the Prime Minister had to say. As you can hear, this is not a simple, you allow the seafood and the canola to come into China tariff-free and we'll sell some EVs. This is a deep, deep integration between Canada and China. What does that mean for us, though, and what does that have to do with the New World Order? I know that's what you're wondering. That's probably why you clicked this episode. Let's get into it. What is the New World Order? Well, for a long time, there was a lot of people who believed the New World Order was a one-world government. There's a lot of people who believe that there are globalist forces. These are very wealthy individuals, and they have installed different leadership in different countries to get their agenda passed, and a lot of it filters through organizations like the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and I know that they're not an elected body, but that's a club that has been formed for the global elites, and there's all indications are, I shouldn't say all indications, there's a lot of people that believe their goal was a one-world government where nations basically give up their sovereignty, and there are massive multinational bodies that are running the world. And maybe it was going that way. I should also point out, by the way, that while there is some circumstantial evidence to indicate that that might actually be true, I mean, the whole knock on the globalist agenda was that they were going to create chaos by creating open borders, by creating basically lawless societies, by things like pandemics, things like that. There was a lot of people, and there is a lot of people, and I'm not going to not validate that concern. I'm going to recognize that that is a real concern that a lot of people have, that the globalists, quote unquote, the world's most wealthy, have incredible power in all corners of the world, and they were trying to create that one world government. They were trying to make people so afraid of what's going on in their own country and in the state of the world that they could swoop in, seize power, and assure people it'll be okay, but we got to do it that way. Maybe that's the way things were going, but that's not the current New World Order. When Donald Trump got elected in America, he pulled America right out of that plan, if it ever was a plan in the first place, and if the Americans were ever in on it. There's a lot of reason to think that things were going the way they were because they were trying to create an agenda. And like I said, open borders, crime in our streets, climate crises, things like that. They were trying to create chaos so that they could come in with a solution, which was a one world government. And that would include things like digital ID, surveillance states, 15-minute cities. These are all what are called conspiracy theories that a lot of people have been whispering about for a very long time. If that was the plan, it doesn't appear to be the plan anymore. What seems to be happening right now is the Americans have basically modernized the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine is this: the colonial powers from Europe and around the world will have no foothold in the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere is going to be controlled by the Americans. They're the big fish on this end of the world. The U.S. has said, when Donald Trump got elected, they don't want to be the world's police force anymore. They don't. They also don't want to be ripped off on trade anymore. And by and large, the world was enjoying a trade imbalance with the Americans. Trump says America was getting ripped off. There was definitely an imbalance. Ripped off might be going a little far, but either way, America is setting themselves up to basically control the Western Hemisphere. And when I say control, I mean control. What's one of the first things that Donald Trump did when he got elected? He took control of the Panama Canal. Now he controls the oil in Venezuela. There's reason to believe that Cuba, a communist dictatorship in the Caribbean, is going to fall, and democracy may prevail there. It may even involve the U.S. I don't know. There's a lot of talk about Greenland, and if I have time, I'll circle back on Greenland in this episode as well. But it would appear that the U.S.'s version of a new world order is simple. The U.S. is going to control the Western Hemisphere, and then other superpowers like China and the EU, Russia, India, they'll all have control in their own little areas. Basically, the New World Order is a world divided up regionally. And nations within those regions will still retain their sovereignty, but they are going to be beholden to the big fish in their part of the world. And here in the Western Hemisphere, our big part of the world is America. So the U.S. has an interesting proposition there. They've actually updated the Monroe Doctrine to the Donroe Doctrine, Don being Donald Trump. This is his version of it. Donald Trump wants to control the supply chains for oil. He wants to control the supply chains for critical minerals and basically all of the world's resources. And in North America, we have a lot of them. What does that mean for the rest of the world? You've got the U.S. controlling the Western Hemisphere. China's going to do their thing, and different countries are going to align with different superpowers. Same with the EU, same with Russia, same with India. Then there's a few middle powers in there too. Countries like Japan, Saudi Arabia, and things like that. Countries like that. Sorry, I shouldn't say things. The New World Order is unfolding right before us. And right now, we as Canadians have a choice to make. We can do what they're telling us they're doing. We're just diversifying our trade relationships. We can't rely on the U.S. anymore as a reliable trade partner, so we're going to go to other places. Well, geography has placed us right above the Americans and right on the border of the Arctic. The Arctic is going to be the last great frontier. There is so much in the Arctic that the world wants to control, not the least of which is the Northwest Passage, a critical shipping route. The U.S. also wants control over that, and that's part of their quest to be the global dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. The New World Order would have the U.S. controlling this part of the world, and the rest of the world, they can figure it out. I mentioned currency earlier. Right now, the vast majority of trade around the world is reconciled in U.S. dollars. And different countries have their own currencies, but for the vast majority of trade, it's reconciled in USD. Well, semi-recently, a new currency has evolved called BRICS. That is a currency that was created by Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. BRICS, B-R-I-C-S. They're trying to create a currency that could compete with the U.S. currency, and much of the trade after the New World Order falls into place is going to be either in BRICS or it'll be done in USD. And in some cases, it might be neither. There might be an emergence of digital currency at some point, but that's well beyond the scope of this episode. I'm just trying to give you a lay of the land and explain to you where we're at. Canada has a choice. We can align ourselves with the Americans as part of this New World Order, or we could align ourselves with countries like China. Well, the U.S., I'm sure, doesn't really have a problem with Canada having new customers and new clients. What they do have a problem with is security. And China presents a big security threat to the Americans. Don't think for a second that the Americans want the Chinese infiltrated or embedded in Canada, where they can keep an eye on the Americans and where they can do whatever it is they might want to do with such close proximity to the Americans. Now let's hear a little bit more of Prime Minister Carney, and I'm going to circle back and put a bow on some of this in just a few minutes.
Prime Minister, this announcement I'd like you to characterize it in terms of how big an entry into the market you expect it really is. And how do you intend to explain it to the U.S. In allowing that entry? And separately, how do you intend to explain it to Canadian car makers who fear any softening on Chinese EVs?
Okay, so you mean the auto portion of the broader partner? Yes, okay. So I think the first thing to say is exactly that it's part of a broader partnership, and the fundamental issue is we have a broader strategic partnership on which to build and create big opportunity. But to get to the auto question and your various questions around specifically, let's put this in context. 49,000 vehicles, which is the cap on Chinese electric vehicle exports to Canada, that's part of this agreement. That's a return to levels last seen in 2023, the last full year before the Canadian tariff actions. That's the first point. Second point, again, to put it in, dimension it, that's less than 3% of the size of the Canadian auto market. The third point, to put in context, and I reference this, is that part of this agreement, and it takes a few years to build this, a couple of years to build this, that a portion, an increasing portion of those exports will be in a new segment of the Canadian market. In other words, electric vehicles that cost less than $35,000 at the landed price. So there's huge opportunity here to get more affordable cars in the electric vehicle market for Canada. The fourth element, and in many respects the most important element, is the beginning of discussions and expectation of Chinese investment in Canada and partnership in Canada to produce vehicles over time, so to partner with Canadian firms. And putting all this, and if I can take the last part of your question, then move to colleagues, which is vis-a-vis the U.S., I think we need to look at this in the context of building. I mean, we're building a new part of our car industry, building cars of the future in partnership, bringing affordable autos for Canadians at a time when affordability is top of mind, and doing it at a scale that allows for a smooth transition in the sector.
We did not, at any point when we were deciding if we wanted to vote for Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney, discuss rebuilding the Canadian auto industry, and we certainly did not discuss whether or not we should allow Chinese EVs into this market. The Prime Minister is trying to sell it to Canadians as, well, you're finally going to get cheap EVs. We're concerned about the cost of new vehicles. The Prime Minister was never concerned about the price of new vehicles. It was him and his policies that created the mandate that all Canadians must buy an EV, and then he didn't even care about the price. He just said Canadians are going to do it, and that's the end of it. Now, right now, those mandates are paused, but will they be coming back now that we've got this new supply of Chinese-made EVs? And what are the security concerns around these Chinese EVs? You know, at first, I thought this was a great idea. Canadians want cheaper cars. Yes, bring it in. My thoughts on this have evolved a lot because it does seem to create a real security threat here. And I don't know the specifics. I don't make cars, and I don't pretend to know the technology. But all indications are, from countries that have already banned these EVs, that they are mobile surveillance machines. For the same reasons that we did not want TikTok in North America. By the way, when I say we, I don't mean me. I always thought it was stupid to ban TikTok. However, governments did it because there were such intense concerns about the Chinese spying on us here in North America. Having those SUVs or EVs or whatever they are rolling around our streets, transmitting information back to Beijing, I don't think that's what anyone in North America wants. And the Prime Minister hasn't addressed those real security concerns around these vehicles.
Steve Chase, Globe and Mail. Good afternoon. This week, 2 Liberal MPs cut short their visit to Taiwan. It was a friendship and outreach visit. They cut it short before they were going to meet with President William Lai. They said in a statement that they were advised to do this by the government. So why Why did the government advise these two Liberal MPs to cut short their visit? And is this an indication we're willing to tailor our foreign policy to placate Beijing?
Well, a couple of things. One is our policy with respect to Taiwan, our one China policy, which was set in 1970, has not changed. We're reaffirming our one China policy. It remains constant. It's consistent. We have relations with the government here, People's Republic of China, and we have people-to-people relations in Taiwan. Those MPs, members of my caucus and members of our caucus, participated in the people-to-people proportion of that trip. But no, not in the government proportion, and that's straightforward, not causing confusion about what the policy is of the government, the policy of Canada that has been the policy of Liberal governments and the policy of Conservative governments over the course of the last 55 years.
Prochaine question, Laurent.
That again, misleading of the Prime Minister. Canada had members of Parliament touring Taiwan. Now, that's a major irritant for the Chinese because there's a lot of reason to believe the Chinese are going to invade Taiwan. They are going, and you know what? If they do, God help them, because it's not just a Trump policy. It's a Biden policy that if China invades Taiwan, the U.S. will come to their defense. This is Canada basically saying that China can do whatever they want. We believe in one China, and we're sorry that we sent our MPs to Taiwan. We know that pissed you guys off. We're pulling them back. We're capitulating to Beijing, is what we're doing by asking those MPs to leave Taiwan in advance of the Prime Minister meeting with the leadership in China. It's complete capitulation, and it is a turn on our values. I don't like the way the Prime Minister phrased that. There are some serious, legitimate human rights concerns around the way the Chinese are treating Taiwan and the Uyghurs.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Less than a year ago, you said that China was the biggest security threat to Canada. Do you still believe that?
The security landscape continues to change, and in a world that's more dangerous and divided, we face many threats. That's the reality, and the job, my responsibilities as Prime Minister, the job of the government, is to manage those threats. You manage those threats by building resilience, building security. You manage those threats through alliances. You manage those threats through engagement. And we're pursuing all of those. And I would say that, well, the threat environment has increased. The risks have multiplied. So too has our resilience and our engagement, which is protecting Canadians on balance.
But does that threat from
Next
China still
question.
exist?
I'll refer to my previous answer.
Very, very dishonest of Prime Minister Carney to not acknowledge it. He himself said it. They were our greatest security threat. And right now he's sweeping all that under the rug. It's a simple question. What changed that China is not our single biggest threat? They have kidnapped Canadians. They censor free speech. They are a communist dictatorship. They have undermined our elections. We know that. They've interfered in our elections to get their preferred candidates elected. All of this has been going on for a while. We know that. Beijing is operating secret police stations, reportedly intimidating Canadians that dare speak out against the Chinese regime. I truly don't understand why the Prime Minister, and you know what? If he says all of that is okay now, we're good with it. Fine. But to pretend that that doesn't exist, I think that's very, very dishonest and misleading of Prime Minister Carney. I get that he's trying to sell this deal. He doesn't want to say anything that's going to upset the Chinese regime. But at the end of the day, these are real, legitimate concerns by Canadians. We want to know what's going on. He is announcing a deep integration of China into Canada. And it seems to me that all we got out of it was lowered tariffs. So I really don't understand why he is not acknowledging the very real reality that China was and is a threat to our security.
Hello, Prime Minister Carney. CSIS has called China an enduring threat to Canadian tech and democracy, and some in the auto sector have said that Chinese EVs could pose a national security risk if allowed into Canada. And your plan is to increase the number of those EVs that are coming into Canada every year. Did you get any assurances from President Xi that China would stay out of elections, for example, and sensitive sectors before allowing more Chinese investment in many sectors, including the auto sector?
So several aspects. Thank you for the question. Several aspects of what you said. The first is, and I'm going to refer to something I said a few minutes ago, which is we're returning to the levels of Chinese automobiles as a cap that we had 2 years ago. Okay. Secondly, just to reinforce, that's less than 3% of the Canadian auto sector. So again, let's keep that in keep it in perspective.
But that's going up by 6.5% every year after.
Yeah. But in you bring that you compound that growth, and you're getting to about 70,000 vehicles at year 5, although the agreement has it reviewed after year 3. So again, it's still in low single-digit proportion of the size of the Canadian auto sector. Canadians buy about 1.8 million autos a year, just to put it in context. The second thing, but you asked, you had autos mentioned, but then you asked, if I may, a deeper question around our relations, and as you said, foreign interference, transnational aspects. First thing I'd say is that part of the agreement includes a security aspect, a greater cooperation between law enforcement on a series of cross-border crime issues. That's the kind of progress we need in order to address a range of issues, including illicit narcotics, but as well as interference. And then the second is that we have an understanding. These are some of the issues that we discuss in terms of our expectations in Canada, our red lines in terms of preventing foreign interference, not tolerating foreign interference, and addressing it when we see it. And as Prime Minister, I've always taken this extremely seriously, just from the point when I got my security clearance well before I was elected leader of the Liberal Party. Thank you.
Again, the Prime Minister didn't answer the question, and I'd like to point out, most of the time when you watch the Prime Minister, it's one question from a journalist and a follow-up. This time, one question, no follow-up. The question from Annie over there at CTV was very simple. It was about these vehicles surveilling and spying on Canadians. He didn't even touch it. He tried to take it into a place that the question wasn't asked. Why will he not address that very real concern?
Prime Minister Brian Platt with Bloomberg News. Yesterday when you met with Premier Lee, one of the things you said in the public remarks was this partnership with Canada and China, this new partnership, sets us up well for the new world order. What did you mean by that? What is the new world order?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, because I think the world is still determining what that order is going to be. And let's be clear what we're talking about first and foremost, which is what is going to govern global trade? What is the role of the WTO going to be? How important are bilateral deals such as the one we're developing, plurilateral deals, if I can use that term, Trans-Pacific Partnership, the potential linkages between Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU? Where is financial regulation, payment system regulation going to fit into that? All of these aspects, I use fancy words like the architecture, the multilateral system that has been developing these is being eroded, to use a polite term, undercut, use another term. So the question is, what gets built in that place? How much of a patchwork is it? How much is it just on a bilateral basis? Or where do like-minded countries in certain areas? So like-minded countries, just to be clear, doesn't mean you agree on everything. Aspects, for example, on digital trade or agricultural trade, climate finance as another area, to move into areas of geostrategy, geosecurity. You will have different coalitions that are formed. So what this partnership does is in areas, for example, of clean energy, conventional energy, agriculture, as we were just talking about, and financial services, which we've talked less about. but the evolution of the global financial system, the role of the renminbi over time, the evolution of cross-border payments. I know it all sounds very dry, except for your organization, which I think takes an interest in it. These are important elements of how the system is going to work. And look, the expectation is that rather than these being developed necessarily through the IMF, WTO, and other multilateral organizations, it is going to be coalitions that develop them not for the world, but for subsectors of the world.
Why would he not answer that very basic question? Does he think that Canadians are going to hear what he just said and understand clearly what the New World Order is? He brought it up. That was his word. New World Order. That's what he said. He knows exactly what the New World Order is. Basically, it's this. All of these trusted institutions like the World Monetary Fund and the World Health Organization, the United Nations, all of these things are starting to erode. They're either in gridlock or they're simply not working. The New World Order is this. There's going to be alliances. And the alliance here, where we live, North America. It's going to be North America and South America. That is going to be a Western Hemisphere sort of sphere on its own. And we have a decision to make. We can be in or we can be out. We can be kind of in where we're basically on board, but we still trade with the rest of the world. And there would be deals bilateral, just between us and those individual countries, not going through World Trade Organizations and transnational bodies and things like that. It would be direct one-on-one deals. What we have to do in Canada is make sure that we can't move. We can't just saw Canada off of North America and let it drift through the Pacific over to China. There are some real geographical challenges here in this New World Order if Canada doesn't want to be in lockstep with the Americans, if we want to be more aligned with the Chinese or whatever other country as part of the New World Order, whatever superpowers we decide to align ourselves with. By and large, I think, generally speaking, President Trump doesn't care. We can do deals with just about anybody. But when those deals compromise safety, that's where President Trump is going to have a big issue, safety and security. The Prime Minister had an opportunity there to explain to people what the New World Order is. It's very simple. The world is fracturing. There will not be a one world government. There's going to be a whole bunch of global subsets, regional superpowers like China, like America, like the EU, like Russia and Eastern Europe. Why won't he just say that? Basically, what we're deciding here is what team we want to be on, and we're trying to not cross a red line in the sand with the Americans. We need to diversify our trade. Noted. Absolutely we do. But do we do it by inviting the biggest competitor to the Americans, the Chinese, into our backyard and giving them tight integration into our economy? That's what's at stake here.
China. Prime Minister Carney is in China. How do you see the deals Canada and China have just signed, trade deals between the two partners?
Well, that's okay. That's what he should be doing. I mean, it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
That was the immediate response from President Trump. Do you think when he had that impromptu news conference outside the White House, he knew the full extent of what Mark Carney agreed to? And is he going to be okay with that? I'm very curious to see, but all indications are, no, he's not going to be all that thrilled with the Chinese having a much stronger foothold in North America via Canada. If you buy one of these Chinese EVs, will you even be allowed to drive it over the border into the U.S.? I really don't know. And how does that align with Trump's vision of a new world order, where the Americans control the Western Hemisphere and the rest of the world figures it out, and we do a whole bunch of bilateral deals between individual countries or between individual spheres? Well, it's kind of hard to say, but we also need to understand what the rest of the world envisions the New World Order as. New World Order, this is not the first time you've heard a Canadian liberal talking about it. It's been talked about many times. I used this example in Friday's edition of the podcast. Before she became our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland was a journalist, and she was the biographer for George Soros. He is a very wealthy globalist elite. Chrystia Freeland, obviously very tightly connected to him. She asked George Soros, back when Obama was in power, about a new world order involving China.
What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order. They are kind of reluctant members of the IMF. They play along, but they don't make much of a contribution because it's not their institution. Their share is not commensurate. Their voting rights are not commensurate to their weight. So I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order. And I think this would be a more stable one, where you would have a coordinated policies. I think the makings of it are already there.
Well, there's a little bit of Chrystia Freeland and George Soros discussing bringing China into a new world order to combat the Washington Consensus, which is what had been happening for a very, very long time. That's not the only time Chrystia Freeland has mentioned the new world order, as recently as less than a year ago during the Liberal leadership race.
President Trump has said dozens of times he wants us to be the 51st state. I don't think any of us wants to be the leader who was asleep at the wheel and didn't get Canada defended, did not work with our democratic allies to protect our borders. They want to work with us. It's time for us to step up at home, to urgently reach out to them and build a new world order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected.
Chrystia Freeland is all in on a new world order. But really, again, it comes down to what is her vision. And she speaks for the left. She is a senior, prominent, left-leaning mouthpiece for the globalist elites. They seem to want a new world order, but the Americans aren't in anymore. Donald Trump has pulled out of whatever way it was going, and now it's sort of the world against America, or against the Western Hemisphere, assuming Donald Trump can control it. What is this new world order, and what does the other side look like? We know what North America is going to look like. What is the rest of the world going to look like? Are they still aiming for a one world government? Are they still aiming for surveillance states, 15-minute cities, digital ID, digital currency, lots of restrictions, and basically dipping our toe in the water of communism? That's the way it kind of looks like this is going. But I also have to point out, in fairness, there's no proof of that so far. So far, there's no proof that I can point out here with absolute certainty and say that's the way it's going. Globalist world, except for the U.S. against the world, or the Western Hemisphere against the world. I can't say that for certain, but I know there's a lot of people who believe that. I do. So let's talk about what we do know about. Canada deeply integrating with China. That gives China a front row seat to watch what's going on in America, possibly conflict with America, possibly try and disperse some of the American power from their Western Hemisphere control. I don't know. The simple answer is I don't know. It's got to play out. But I do know that Canadians are soon going to have to decide what side they're on. Are they on the American side, where they want to have Fortress North America? Or are they on the globalist side? And what is the globalist agenda for the rest of the world? Is it going to be as simple as the New World Order sounds? The world is just going to not have that one American superpower that is the world's cop, and they basically control everything. It's going to be a bunch of regional powers? Or is it going to be America versus the rest of the world? And if that's the case, what side do you want to be on? Let's come back now and talk about the Chinese EVs that we've now agreed to sell into Canada. As you know, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has been firmly opposed to that for a long time. He does not want those Chinese-made EVs coming into our market for a lot of different reasons. And as it turns out, he wasn't invited on the trip over to China, and he wasn't even consulted that Mark Carney was going to do this. Listen to Premier Ford.
And you had mentioned earlier this week that it could jeopardize the talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. What effect do you think it'll have?
Well, first of all, anyone who buys these cars, they won't be allowed to go to the U.S. cybersecurity. I call it the spy car that they're bringing in, and they won't be allowed to get over there, and it's going to tick off the Americans.
Doug Ford is absolutely right. It is going to tick off the Americans. Big time. They're not going to be okay with this. What are we doing to our relationship with the Americans, and why is Carney doing this? Is it truly just the way he's trying to make it seem on the surface that we're diversifying our trade agreements and trying to get more investment in Canada? Or is this provocative? Is this China using Canada to get much, much, much closer to the Americans for whatever reason that the Chinese, not good reasons, by the way? Is that it?
I love my brothers and sisters to the north. I'm from northern Wisconsin. I love my brothers and sisters to the north. I'm from northern Wisconsin. I'm not going to accuse them of making the smartest decisions all the time. I think they will live to regret the day they partner with China in bringing in their vehicles.
That is the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy. Doesn't like this deal. And Trump hasn't spoken yet. We still don't know exactly how he feels about what Canada did with China. But that's a senior Trump official saying this is not a good idea and we're going to regret it. Let's go even further down. We have some far-right voices in America that do have a lot of influence. I want to introduce you to one of the most influential ones, Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is a former senior advisor to Donald Trump. I don't know that he's very heavily involved anymore. If he is, they certainly don't publicize that fact because Steve Bannon became far, far, far right and not palatable for the average person. I don't know that his views necessarily align with Donald Trump's anymore, but I'll tell you, he's got some serious concerns about this. And whether he's right or wrong, this is the message that he is blasting to his massive following on social media and via his podcast. This is Steve Bannon.
Carney is an enemy of the United States. It's obvious. He's partnered, as they've been infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party and radical Islam. They love beta males. They feast off beta males like Carney. They feast off these people. What he did in Beijing was tantamount to an economic declaration of unrestricted warfare against the United States of America. And this is why President Trump's been hammering him. The Canadians, it's your problem, and you better clean it up.
Obviously, Steve Bannon has got some very strong feelings about this. That's the way he sees this going. And you know what? He might not be too far off. Has our government been infiltrated by China? It wasn't that long ago, our former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, talked about how much he admired the basic dictatorship of the Chinese people, of the Chinese government. There's more. You heard Chrystia Freeland talking about a new world order that she wants China involved in. How about other members of the Liberal Party? Our housing minister, Gregor Robertson, former mayor of Vancouver. He was doing a parliamentary hearing, and he was questioned by a Conservative member of Parliament, Aaron Gunn. Here's Aaron asking, again, a senior member of Carney's cabinet, if he thinks China is on the wrong side of Canadian values.
So, Minister, some things have changed, some things have not. So I'll just ask you a couple quick yes or no questions. Would you agree that the People's Republic of China is a dictatorship?
To the chair, I'm here to speak for my ministry and not to make geopolitical assertions.
It's a pretty basic question. I mean, if we're giving $1 billion of taxpayer money to a state-owned company, we should probably be on the same page of whether this country is a dictatorship or not.
To the chair, I want to clarify that the government of Canada made an investment and created an infrastructure bank that is arm's length from government to invest in infrastructure here in Canada. And we do not have direction on what those investments are specifically. We trust that to a board.
Minister, do you like President Xi's chances in the next election?
Point of order.
Thank you. Yes, one moment, everybody. Mr. Gunn, I'm going to pause your time. You have a minute left, roughly. Ms. Wien.
I'm just curious how this is relevant back to the conversation that...
Liberal members obstructed that so that he didn't have to answer the question. Let's do another Canadian parliamentary hearing.
So for the committee, can you provide any information of how many of these police, so-called police stations have been and are operating currently in Canada?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Stancho. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And as I said, I embrace the committee's study of it. I would begin by pointing out that we are deeply concerned with regards to any allegations and reports of foreign interference. And as you have seen, there have been public reports of these so-called police stations. I would point out to you that with regards to the details of the investigation, that this is the subject of ongoing initiatives by the RCMP. And with regards to those details, I would invite you to put those questions directly to the Commissioner.
To the Commissioner, can you provide information to Canadians of how many of these alleged so-called police stations are operating in Canada, have operated previously, and if any of them have been shut down?
Thank you for that question. Do I need to turn this?
Yeah, you got it, Brett.
Thank you for that question. Currently, we're looking at 3 of the police stations in Toronto and 1 in Vancouver. Obviously, we're working with our police of jurisdiction as well as with other Government of Canada national security agencies. We've initiated investigation and it's led by the Greater Toronto Integrated National Security Enforcement Team, INSET. And so far the elements of our investigation have been very overt. Marked police cars in members in uniform to cause disruption to the allegations. We've had that visible presence, and that's mostly so that people will see the actions, first of all, because we need more information. So we hoped, and it did occur when we do this, a lot of people come forward to provide information because they see the police in the area dealing with the allegations. The investigation is ongoing, obviously, and can't get into the various details specifically, but we did put out a statement in, I think, October, November, saying that we were actually investigating reports of possible...
That was former RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki. Please do not for a second pretend it's not true. You just heard the RCMP confirm. The Chinese have secret police stations that are operating here in Canada. Now we're going to be cooperating with the Chinese and sharing intelligence with the Chinese. I'm really not sure how to explain this. I don't know how much more I can say other than Canadians are going to have to decide how they feel. Nearest I can tell, politically speaking, this is the way it appears this is going. The Liberals want Canada very deeply tied to China. The Americans are not going to like that. Now, on the Conservative side, so far, not a lot from Pierre Poilievre, which kind of surprises me. I'd really like him to come out and talk about the New World Order and how he sees Canada fitting into it, because I'd like to know if he wants to align Canada with the U.S. or if he wants to invite China to have a very strong foothold in North America. In the name of fairness, the Prime Minister did go to China, and he also went to Qatar. That's actually where he is today as I record. He spoke to the media after some meetings he had there. Let me tell you just a little bit of what the Prime Minister had to say over there. Then I'm going to wrap up this episode.
Now, as I think we all know, the global landscape is changing rapidly, leaving businesses and workers in a state of uncertainty. These changes are also undermining the effectiveness of our multilateral institutions on which middle powers like Canada and Qatar have historically relied. In response, Canada is focused on what we can control, securing new trade and investment partnerships, so we're not reliant on a single country, but are stronger and more resilient to global shocks. My colleagues and I arrived here yesterday from Beijing, where we had just secured a new trade agreement that at first blush will help unlock more than $7 billion in export markets for Canadian farmers, ranchers, fish harvesters, and agri-food workers across our country. This is the beginning also of a new strategic partnership between Canada and China, a partnership that deepens collaborations in areas such as energy, clean technology, agri-food, and financial services, a partnership that will increase trade and catalyze new investment. Tomorrow I will go to Davos, Switzerland, where I'll meet with leaders in commerce, technology, and global governance.
Well, there it is. He just said it. Tomorrow, and he didn't say he's going to the World Economic Forum, but that's where he's going. He'll be attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, and one of the things they'll be discussing is global governance. The Americans are out. Are we going with China and Russia and all the other big superpowers for a global government? Or Are we going to stay in our hemisphere, partnered with the Americans in lockstep, and continue to enjoy the way of life that we currently enjoy? And how does Greenland factor into this? Well, it's reasonable to think that if it's the world against the Western Hemisphere, then we should be able to defend ourselves. And the attack that comes against North America will come over the poles. That's how it's going to happen. To defend ourselves, we need the Golden Dome. That's part of the reason that very early on in his presidency, President Trump, looking down the line at the way this is going, decided we need to be able to defend ourselves. He wants Greenland strategically so he has more control over the Arctic. Now, he could have a lot of control over the Arctic if he could reach a deal with Canada. But so far, we haven't been able to reach that deal, and it doesn't seem like Mark Carney or any of the Liberals are interested in reaching a deal with the Americans, whether it be for political reasons or whether it be for ideological reasons, in that they want this World Economic Forum, one world government. It seems like it because that's what these people have been building towards for a very long time. Earlier, I played Chrystia Freeland talking to George Soros back when Obama was in charge, about Obama trying to bring China into the New World Order. It really kind of feels like, if I'm being honest and objective and looking at all the facts, looking at everything that happened, particularly over the COVID period, like they were setting the world up for a one-world, globalist-run government. Until Trump came in and interrupted their whole plan. Now they're scrambling to try and form new alliances. Make no mistake, though, I don't think they have any interest in working with the Americans. This is going to continue to play out, but remember this. Part of the reason I wanted to do this specific episode is because once it's out, it lives in infamy. This is a critical moment in the history of the world. When Prime Minister Carney calls it a hinge moment, he's absolutely right. The way it was is not the way it will be. The world is changing, for better or worse. A lot of people would argue both sides of that, better and worse. However, Canada needs to figure out what its place in all of this is. And if I'm being honest, the way I see things right now, and I'm open to evolving my thinking on this, but the way it seems right now, I would much, much, much rather be aligned with America, have a strong, stable, sovereign North America and South America here in the Western Hemisphere, than go with the globalist government. Go with some of the plans that it looked like were unfolding for a while there until Donald Trump came in and interrupted their plans. And you've likely heard lots about those. This has been whispered about and rumored for a long time on the internet. They had very interesting plans for the world. The globalists who sit around at places like the World Economic Forum and plan out the future of the world. Digital ID, digital currency, surveillance states. They wanted people to basically be the workers to fulfill the jobs that they need done. Were they going to treat us great? No, it seems like modern day slavery. They were trying to get us to eat bugs. They opened up factories to try and create protein out of bugs. I personally am not interested in the globalist vision for this world. I like things, more or less, the way they are. Could it be better? Absolutely. Am I ready to turn my back on the Americans and welcome in the Chinese? Somebody's going to have to sell me on that, because right now I see some upside, but I see a lot of downside, and soon we're going to have to make a choice. Friends, tomorrow, regular episode. That'll be Monday the 19th of January. Not all political. This one, I wanted to get out so you could hear it, so you could understand what the argument is, so you could hear the way things are going and get my interpretation of what the New World Order is. And again, I don't exactly know. I know what the plan is for our hemisphere. I don't know what the rest of the world is planning, and I don't know how Russia and China factor into that. But we will see. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you got something out of it. If you didn't, a little bit of time wasted, not a big deal. I'll get back on track tomorrow with what I do every single day here in Scott Fox After 9. Hey, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. Let's stay in touch here. I do this every single day, giving you way more context and clarity than you get from the mainstream media. I try and present it to you from a balanced lens, although I do have a bias. I am a conservative with centrist conservative values. I lean right, but I'm open to all perspectives and points of view. I don't know where this is going, but as it unfolds, I will help walk you through it every step of the way. Thank you, friends. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you back here tomorrow.